David, do you have an extra pen?
You don't want unless you want red.
Joe has 2 more in his briefcase.
Thank you, Joe. Our regularly scheduled council meeting, our regularly scheduled special council meeting of Tuesday, January 11th, I'm confused on the month. It's now in session. Any changes to the agenda? All right, then our agenda is approved as submitted. First item is a performance-based outcomes presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I may have to adjust this a little bit so I'm at the right level. Well, first of all, thank you, Council, Mayor, for having us tonight. I'm Todd Miller with the City Council for Centennial. And Alicia Thomas, who's with the City Manager's Office, will be helping me present tonight. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done with performance metrics in the City of Centennial. And first of all, I title this Revolution because it's really not a revolution. Number one, it's been used for a number of years in business. A lot of different governments have started to use performance metrics, and it's more of an evolution. Now, hopefully the evolution goes farther than Homer Simpson. However, we're still a work in process, so as we continue, we learn new things every day. So basically, in 2004, we began utilizing performance metrics within the City of Centennial. We joined the ICMA Performance Group in 2007, and then we joined the Carl Consortium 2008. Did a lot. I think you guys do some of that as well. A lot of comparatives, trying to compare between cities as to, how do we perform as opposed to how do you perform. And we kind of figured out at that very point, kind of a surprise. Along the evolutionary change, we were still at the monkey level. We didn't reach any particular goals. We didn't have any key reporting. We had more and more statistics, but really nothing that we could utilize. So we were really data rich, but information poor. And this is one of my favorite things to bring up. We received this a couple years ago, which says that, you can read it, but 2008 annual data report was mailed to everybody early September of 2009, okay, which was 6 weeks earlier than previously. However, what's wrong with this?
Is it important?
It's important. That's a good point. It's really not a management tool. Some of the information that is in those books that are mailed to each city is 20 months old. So really, we looked at it, and I looked at it. I've been pushing for performance measurements for a long time. Looked at it and said, wait a minute, this information is not something we can utilize to make day-to-day operational changes. So based on that, we made some changes in how we perform. 2010 was the first year that we actually made a change as to what we were doing. First thing we did was we passed one of the first ordinances in the country in regards to performance measurements and performance metrics. Now, if you hear me say KPM, that means key performance measurement or metrics. We actually, in February of 2010, we passed an ordinance stating that every department that could have a performance metrics, we would put that in place for our citizens. Basically, same thing. We okayed it. We passed it in February of 2010. This is my favorite thing. We just got done with the new year. We all have resolutions. We all have things we're trying to do. One of mine is to lose 20 pounds. And luckily, I'm behind this, so you can't tell, but I need to lose 20 pounds. This is kind of a good scenario as far as the difference in how we handle things. If we handled it as most governments utilize it on an annual basis, I wouldn't even look until the end of the year as to what my goals were, and I would jump on the scale on New Year's Eve and see if I've lost the 20 pounds or not. However, what we're trying to do in Centennial, and hopefully, and other cities as well, and hopefully Littleton will look at this, is something it's much more demanding, but at the same point, I think it fulfills the needs a little better. Every month, basically, if I was going to lose 20 pounds, every month I would jump on the scale, I would track my progress, I would have a monthly meeting and report to my wife, who would be the person I have to report to on a monthly basis, and ask her if I'm doing well in my losing weight. Not something I really look forward to doing, but something that keeps me accountable as we go forward.
Todd?
Yeah,
You're
Phil.
going to take questions as we go along?
Absolutely.
Okay. Just jumping back a little bit to that ordinance which you passed in February. With that, I didn't read the fine print, but you said that every department that would
Right.
move to some measures. That would sound kind of scary to me if I was in a business and it would say, you know, every unit that would,
Right.
if I didn't know whether I could or I'm not familiar with it. So as you led up to the ordinance, are you going to get to what was some of the discussions or the dialogue that occurred?
Right.
So this may or may not have been scary at the time.
Yeah, basically, there are certain departments that it may not be beneficial to have performance metrics. And some that, you know, originally we talked about the city attorney's office. That may not be one that it's good to have performance metrics. You can, but at the same point, you know, do you really want to have so many legal aspects going on and have goals for that type of thing? Through this whole process, we've rolled this out on a slow basis to different departments. Actually, the city attorney department is one that we might actually put something in place. But we didn't want to hamstring it by saying every single department has to have performance metrics and report. It's basically if it's helps hold the department accountable, helps hold or provide transparency to our citizens. So there's a number of gamuts that we look at as far as, you know, how do we work through it. So we've rolled this out slowly, and Alicia will bring more of that up in a minute as to how we've done this with our departments. But very good question. Actually, we have a copy of the ordinance if you want to look at it. We'll hand that. Is that out, Alicia, or it's back in the back?
Good measure for your city attorney is keeping council members out of jail.
That's, ooh, I don't think I'm going to touch that right now. But true. So anyway, what I'm trying to compare here is how most governments do things on an annual basis as far as setting goals, and then what we're trying to do as far as setting goals, however, having kind of a monthly update and a monthly look at where are we in that process of losing my 20 pounds. Basically, you know, this is nothing new. This is nothing that we've done on our own. We have blended a number of different cities and counties as far as how they handle this process. I'm not going to talk about them. A couple of them I'll highlight, but you know, the city staff system, if any of you are aware of that program in Baltimore, Miami-Dade County, which I'll talk about in a minute, Austin, Texas, which does a great job of reporting their metrics, and Rochester Transit, which actually does an incentive program which we're trying to build towards. So really, CityStat is kind of the cornerstone of this program and how it was initiated. They took what's called CompStat. If any of you know, obviously know Rudy Giuliani. He started in the New York City. He started a thing called CompStat, which was looking from a police standpoint, looking at statistics on a regular basis to decide how to handle things. It's called the broken windows theory. Many of you probably heard of the broken windows theory. What happened is Baltimore took that theory and put it in place for all their departments rather than just the police department. So their program is called CityStat. It's been around for 10, 11 years. They have been very successful with that program. It's kind of the cornerstone of how most cities try to follow or progress. This is actually a slide from Miami-Dade. This is the other thing we've kind of blended into our system. There's qualitative and there's quantitative measurements. And, you know, quantitative numbers, that's a great thing. That's what CompStat does a lot of. Miami-Dade brings in customer surveys or surveys of their citizens and uses them as a benchmark to compare where they are 1 year to, in this case, 3 years later. So they actually benchmark through their surveys where they are so that they know if they're getting better or worse with their performance. And this is one case where they actually do, Miami-Dade actually did look at their performance as opposed to other cities or other counties and looked at, are we doing better or worse? And I'm going to let Alicia explain to you kind of how our system works internally. She's very involved with this. And the other thing is, just so you know, first of all, thank you for letting us cross the border to come talk to you. I hope we can do more of this because there's certainly things we can learn from Littleton, and hopefully you can learn things from us as well. So, Alicia?
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Alicia Thomas. As Todd said, I've partnered with him in working on the performance metrics for the City of Centennial. I work actually within the city manager's office, and so when we introduced the ordinance to City Council last January 2010, we've been working together to implement the program for, as Todd described, kind of a pilot program for this year to see how it would develop. And it provided us some tools, some learning tools along the way, what worked, what didn't work, and we're still learning, and we're still implementing. And so we look forward to this next year, but we can talk a little bit about what our bases were. When we approached the conversation about performance measurements with the different service areas, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at SMART goals. And we may have all heard of what a SMART goal is, but just making sure that it's measurable, it has some time basis along with it, it's reasonable and obtainable, and we've had to check in with each other on determining what would be benchmarks along this path, because in the beginning we weren't really quite sure how to benchmark. When we talked about looking at ICMA's performance measurements, there were ways to do that, but we're a little bit different of a fabric than some of the cities, especially because we contract out a lot of our services. So some of our measurements are already defined in contracts. So again, another learning tool along the way. But what I'd like to bring your attention to is really the A in SMART. And again, they're actionable goals, but they're aligned goals. And we really wanted to make sure and emphasize that with our departments. And I'm sorry, you probably cannot see the fine print as well as this on this, but we do have a handout in the back that we will provide to our service areas as we discuss this topic, because it's really an opportunity to educate the different service areas on what are outputs, what are outcomes, what are our strategic goals, and how do they align to what council's directions has been for the past year. So then again, we align it with our mission and our vision as well. And I'll show you an example of that in a report in a minute. This is an example of one of our meetings. It doesn't look like City Stats example just a few slides ago. It's a one-on-one discussion with service areas. And it's a formal setting, as formal as it may get. We meet with our mayor, the city manager. I'm also on the review panel, and Todd as well, Mr. Miller as well. In this setting, you will notice that it's really more of a time for us to discuss the monthly performance. We may have monthly meetings with every single service area, but we may not. And so we look at those reports on a monthly basis, but to implement monthly meetings for every service area may be very comprehensive and time encumbrant. It may take a lot of our time. So what we try to do is look at those areas that really need attention for that month. And we check in with the other service areas periodically along the way. So really, it's an opportunity for us to improve our coordination and cooperation with the service areas, take a look at what they're seeing out in the field too, and it also provides that context to the numbers that we see on the graphs. And it allows us to brainstorm different suggestions. We've implemented different things on our website to enhance some of the customer service aspects of what we provide. Again, you're not really going to be able to see this, but this is the front sheet of our report. And right at the top there, it talks about strategic alignment. So we're engaging the service areas at that point to directly look at our visioning document, look at our goals, and then develop their performance outcomes based upon that. We also have different spaces in there to talk about our previous meeting notes, if there's follow-up. We look at our analyst notes, so what we noticed in that month's report that we want to make sure and bring up. We also allow space for defining things, because we're not all experts in these different technical fields. So some of us need to know what a certain term may mean that they're measuring. So we have some space for that as well. Really, this is just the graph, the image for you to just see what this may, what a report may look like. Again, we trend it differently for each outcome. One may be a year-to-date report. One may be a monthly. We really talk about that and engage the surface area, what really makes sense for them. Along with the data or the outcomes, we want to make sure and add context to our meetings. So we look at customer surveys. And all of our service areas have either implemented or are about to implement a customer service survey, so that we're gauging their input too, because what they define as timely service may be different than our definition, and so we want to make sure we're on the same page. We have experienced challenges with this program, as you do with any new implementation of a program. So I think what we've learned from this is that we must have commitment all around the table. It must start from our leaders and our executive team, and then down to our staff. So they really have to feel why they're doing this, why are we keeping track of these numbers, what does it mean? So commitment is a big factor in this success. There definitely is a fear of change, especially in our environment where we have a lot of contractors. So not only are we measuring them on a monthly basis, but we're really holding people's feet to the fire as making sure that you are going to be providing what you have said in your scope of services. So there's a little bit of fear of that change, and then also making sure, well, how is this going to be reviewed? Do I have an opportunity to discuss? So, for example, when we talk about compliance and code enforcement, we may notice numbers are down 1 year or 1 month, and when we come to our meeting, we realize there was 4 snow days. And so there wasn't really the opportunity to be out in the field as much, and so those meetings have the opportunity for that conversation. But initially, that presents fear to them. We've also had to do some education on outputs and outcomes. There really is a misunderstanding about that. So when we look at data, we want to make sure, is there a goal associated with it to make sure that it can be more of an outcome? And also, again, directly, is it related to one of our council goals? There's a perception there's additional work. What we've tried to do is coordinate with our service areas, because most of our service areas already complete monthly reports. So we try to coordinate with them to look what we can glean from those reports as outcome measures. But if there are areas that we do have to create others, we want to make sure that we're balancing that workload for them. And as I mentioned, again, it's a balance between qualitative and qualitative data. So we are looking not only what our time measurements are, but what our customers' input may be on our timely service. Involving staff has been a key part of this program, because it's had to be more of a collaborative process. For us to find what they feel is important for them to gauge on a technical format, and then also for us to say, well, this is what we hear from citizens, and this is going to be something that we need to measure to make sure that we're doing our jobs well. It has to be meaningful. They're not going to want to report on something that doesn't make sense to them. So really, again, involving their input on their measurements is important. The one-on-one opportunity in the monthly meetings we feel has been beneficial to them. They're actually able to talk a little bit more about the program, and perhaps they haven't had that opportunity in the past. So we found that that's actually been more of a rewarding process for them. And then we've also found in some instances that really they can, hold back on some of the reporting because it may not be as important as some of the key performance measurements. So they have found some benefit as well with that. And again, the education has been year-round, and around the table for all of us, which is really good. I'd just like to point out a few of the results that we've realized over the past year. This is only for 7 service areas, so we feel it's actually been very meaningful for the program so far. There's been a 35% decrease in our municipal court customer wait time. They were able to look at their processes a little bit more and see if they can reduce some of their processes in the meantime. We just implemented now I can't even think of the name. On Thursday, we have plan reviews come in on there's like no appointment needed. And so we measure the time on that, and they've been able to find processes to get people in and out same day as they drop off their plan reviews. As I mentioned, we have started implementing customer surveys if there was a lack of that information in those service areas. So they found that that's been beneficial as well. We also look at our citywide survey. We completed this just last year, and now we're looking in not only in the customer day-to-day, but our citywide perspective as well to make sure that we are measuring what matters. We also noticed that in one of our processes, we identified that there could be potentially 1 FTE of duplication of work. And we're working on that to make sure that we can implement technology where we can and better utilize our staff. And we recently increased a budget in a service area, it's actually in our animal services budget, to allow for more education material, especially in regards to licensing. We have a relatively low licensed animal population in the city, and we have found that increased advertisement results in more licenses. And so this was a justification process that we went through in the budget process. And then also we want to make sure that we're accountable and transparent to our citizens and make sure that the information is on the website as well.
Alicia, Todd took the opportunity to mention the heavy-handed side of it, which is accountability and transparency. What I'm hearing is a few other benefits in coming out, which is taking a look at some clarity and alignment and certainly the communication that's there. Being on the staff side and hearing some of that, what are some of the other things that you would say? I know you're with the city manager's office, but as you might speak for the rest of the staff, are they finding more fun, more joy, or as it's coming through? What might they be saying?
Certainly, I would say that I think that's probably a little hard to read in some instances. As I mentioned, many of our services are contracted, and so part of the requirements is that we have performance metrics in those contracts. And as Todd has mentioned, he really has pushed past few years to make sure that when we're approving a contract, we are adopting that contract with some performance measurements in there. So I think in some instances, it's been the standard, and it's been expected. In other instances, it's been the transformation of taking a report that's very output driven to something that's more outcome based. So it takes a little bit of a process to get there and some education, as I mentioned. But I think if you attach the meaning to that, the surface areas have been more acceptable to that. And I'm not sure if Littleton is familiar with the ICMA Center for Performance Measurement data that you have to complete on an annual basis. But for instance, in code enforcement, it was an 83-page template. So I think in some instances, they are relieved that they don't have to compile 83 pages of data and then not realize what they were looking at until later on, sometimes 20 minutes later.
And Alicia, you mentioned in the area of customer surveys and building those. Having been in some of that area, customer survey design is some science and quite a bit of art that comes along with that. Are those customer surveys some things that you're designing within the city manager's office, or where are those coming from?
Well, one service area that, or I would say one department, which is community development, we probably have focused the most on that department. And so the director of that department has been very consistent with the different surveys for the different divisions. So they have, again, focused on aligning what is important, what we have heard from City Council in regards to being responsive, being professional, being timely. And so some of those measures are really what we're looking for in those surveys. Again, I think we really try to gauge what may be, and it sometimes is, it's difficult to figure out what may be the right question to ask, but we try to make it more about the experience.
One of the keys, Phil, first of all, none of the departments, I would say, love this system. However, as they have gone through the progress in the program, they have started to understand, as Alicia mentioned, they really have a one-on-one opportunity with the city manager and the mayor to talk about what happens in their department. And really, in a lot of days, in a lot of ways, they don't get that opportunity on a regular basis. So a lot of departments, once they're in the program and under the process, they look at it, and as Alicia said, we've actually reduced the amount of data that they've had to collect. I mean, you know, creating and collecting data is not easy, and we've kind of said, okay, we want 5 key performance measurements in your department. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? And just, you know, let's pick 5 things and create targets for each one of those measurements. So in a lot of cases, as Alicia said, we've really reduced the amount of work. So they are happy in that respect, and they're happy to have the one-on-one time. The surveys, you know, once some of them, municipal courts, a great example for us. They didn't have a survey. Some city council members even said, why would you want to survey municipal courts? Because nobody's happy when they go pay a ticket. And that's very true. However, the opportunity, as Miami-Dade has done, and what we're trying to do is actually you benchmark it. So it may be that they're not happy about paying a ticket, but, you know, if we change processes and we do a better job, are they less happy as far as how things go? So if you benchmark it, you know, 1 year in 2010, and then you look at it again in 2 years, are we doing a better job? You know, we ask them, were we professional? Were we courteous? Those are things that you can ask them in a survey, and even if they're not happy about paying a ticket, they'll still usually give you a decent answer. So,
Municipal court's kind of an interesting area because that's sometimes the only contact folks will have with municipal government.
oh, absolutely. And our municipal court director has done a great job. She's embraced this. She's one of the people who has really cut the process time. We put it in place. She went from, you know, an average of 60 minutes to rotate people through the process down to less than 45 minutes. She's one of the people who's looking at putting a survey in place. She wants to put a kiosk out front. So it does get people to think, and you also empower them to create their own solutions to problems. So it's, you know, those are some of the things that come out of the process of meeting on a monthly basis is everybody's on the same page, and they have an opportunity to do some problem solving. So that was actually the last slide. If there's any other questions, the other thing that I would certainly invite you, if you want to, like I said, on a monthly basis, we have meetings. You are more than welcome to come observe a part of the meeting or see how we work with the departments and how they meet with the mayor and with the city manager and how that process actually works. And like I said, all of those reports for those departments are online, and I can also give you the information as far as, you know, looking at how we go through this. So, Bruce.
Todd, I guess a couple questions. Talk a little bit, maybe I think you touched on this to a bit early on, but as you guys were getting this project going, I think a lot of and we sort of chatted at the outset, the hard part is getting it started. From your perspective, what were some of the important attributes of sort of getting liftoff?
Well, one of the keys, I believe, there's 2 things. Number one, we really do this, like I said, as a management tool, as a way to compare against ourselves. I don't really believe in this system to compare against other cities. I don't want to compare my municipal court to yours, because there's a lot of differences in how things are run. So that was the first difficult thing, is to let people understand, hey, we're really looking at, continuous improvement. How do we work and move forward? The other piece that I think is very important is, as Alicia said, you can't just slam dunk and give people, the measurements that ICMA gives you for, animal control. You need to, if you sit down with the department and say, and you have to be careful, because we did find this as well. If you sit down with the department and say, tell me what you do on a day-to-day basis, and let's figure out the 5 key things that you do. The problem with that is it does take more time. It takes more time than just pulling it out of a can, pulling it out of a book, saying, okay, you're going to report on these 5 functions. However, I think long-term there's more buy-in and more opportunity to create, some interest in the program if you ask them to participate. The flip side is it does take you more time. It does take more time to get it up and moving. We went through a lot of things where we came up with some measurements, and then the city manager and the mayor came in and they said, we want these things measured, we want these things measured. The department said, oh, we want these measured. And we ended up, in some cases, having 15 things. That's unruly. Okay, you really don't want that. You want to get to 5 or 6 key measurements that you actually have targets for. Data is one thing, targets are another. So trying to bring that back down in scope, that took some time as well. So those are really the 2 keys, is involving your departments and making sure that you're hitting the targets that are aligned with what you as city council want to do, from a 40,000-foot level.
And I guess just maybe a following question. Did you run into situations where you maybe had processes that were cutting across departments, where a given department, I assume you do, but where a given department's going to be impacted by something not necessarily in their control?
Yeah, and that's the difference between an output and an outcome. And that's one of the things we struggled with originally, which we've really learned a lot about, as far as, you can't set targets for things that are an outcome. You can't control how many people come in the door for your municipal courts or your building services. So and some of those run across departments as well. So what we tried, and it was a learning process to learn, no, we want to set things where we have a target, where you have a difference. So you can make a difference as a manager and say, hey, you know what, I can change our process time or our customer wait time from 60 minutes to, I want a goal of 45 minutes. So something that has a target. We've really kind of gotten away from things that we have no control about. So that's the difference between the 2.
Questions? Thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you all for having us. I really appreciate it. And once again, if you want to come observe how it works on a monthly basis, we would love to have you. So
What day of the week you do that with?
usually the 4th Friday of the month that we meet with all the departments and talk about
Throughout
it.
the day?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can certainly contact either one of us. We'll give you the schedule. So thank you very much.
Good luck for 2011.
Absolutely. Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
All right, next we have a staff analysis of the property on South Santa Fe.
Yeah, council, and I think hopefully there were copies of the staff memo at the back. In December, this last December, Jim Abear, who's here tonight, made a presentation to council. And can I get this screen up? Maybe?
I don't have that presentation. I think that was the last study session.
Yeah, but I thought he said something about that.
Thanks, Dennis. Let me wait till Mr. Miller gets this. Thank you. Thanks, Doug. You're welcome. presentation to you in December 14th at your study session. Just to orient everybody, this is Santa Fe Drive. This is the Lee Gulch Trail. This is the Lee Gulch property. Here's the river that's owned jointly by South Suburban. This is Santa Fe Sand and Gravel. This parcel right here, it's a little less than 2 acres. Meadowwood Corporation, we commonly refer to this as the Buck property because the Douglas Buck family has owned it for many, many years. It's actually split into 2 parcels, but it's this contiguous piece of about 18 acres owned by the Buck family. Right here, Freeman Land Company. Jim, I don't know why it's called that, but
Long story.
long story. All right. Anyway, this kind of piece right here is the 14 acres that Mr. Hebert discussed on the 14th. Gave you a little background about how he and his wife came to be owners for it. We talked about the proposed Walmart, which in fact the plan was approved by the city council and consequently turned down by the citizens of Littleton. Certainly Mr. Hebert's property was an important piece of that, but there are 2 other properties here. One is owned by a gentleman named Mike Hummel, who has designs by Sundown, and then the Ida, is it Ida or Ida, Charlie? Ida. The Ida family, and we've met them, but some of you who've been around a long time, the Ida family, I think, has owned this property for many, many, many years. So you have a very long time landowner here. And then, of course, you have the Woolhurst Landing residential subdivision, which has been there probably since the 70s. Something. Then back here, the open space parcels that the city acquired from the Saperchi family and then subsequently sold off the north 10 acres to South Suburban. So Mr. Hebert was in to discuss this property, which after the overturning of the Walmart plan by the citizens, Mr. Hebert indicated that he had been trying to market the property, obviously in the middle of a worst recession in the last 45 years. Not a lot of great interest, although he talked about some interest that he had. And basically indicated that he was interested in certainly selling the property, that he had some conversations with Councilwoman Brinkman and also with Mr. Lorenz from the Director of the South Suburban Parks and Recreation District about the property being purchased for some type of open space, recreation, whatever. And then that would basically, Mr. Hebert, and I can certainly appreciate on a night like tonight where it's 0 degrees outside, I can be sympathetic with selling this property and getting back to your home in the Bahamas, so not having to tiptoe around the goose poop that we have all winter. So we understand perfectly Mr. Hebert's desire to sell this property. So after Mr. Hebert's presentation, Mayor, you and some others said, what is the staff response? So that's the memo that we sent out to you. The first part of it was, and I think you had some of these questions, what are sort of some of the trade-offs? What does staff see as some of the trade-offs if, in fact, the council or anybody else wants to proceed with this property as some sort of open space? In my memo, I said public amenity because we attached a second concept that Councilman Stallman has advanced, and that's a solar garden. Mr. Stallman can elaborate on that, but as I understand it, and Phil has left the room, but actually, as part of the whole kind of sustainable energy milieu, there are some solar gardens around. Actually, there's a couple of cities and Phil has more details. I think the city of Lafayette, I think Boulder, I'm trying to remember, maybe Bruce off the top of my head. But there are some of these that are up and running. They have some very specific economic parameters to them. But anyway, Mr. Stallman, kind of this whole alternative energy, what are some creative things to do? He had at least raised the prospect, I think he wanted the council to consider, could part of this property be in fact used for a solar garden? So in the staff response, and when I said staff response, it's mainly the Development Review Committee, myself, Charlie Bloston, CD Director Dennis Swain, and Chris Gibbons, our BIA Director. We readily stipulate, we confess that we have been the fly in the ointment and the wet blanket for several years on this property being converted. So we'll just stipulate to that right up front, we're guilty. However, one of the things we wanted to talk about were what were some of the reasons behind that. We certainly agree with Mr. Hebert that in the short term, there's not likely to be vigorous interest in his property. However, in this instance, if council wants to move forward, we think you need to do it at least with a framework of it being a strategic decision. And by that I mean, we understand that there's open space money, we've had the task force, people have been looking for properties up and down the river. In this instance, one of the reasons that the Development Review Committee and the development staff has kind of been, again, the fly in the ointment, is this is one of the key parcels that has been identified since the late 1990s, and we'll send out the 2005 and 2007 economic development reports. And Chris, we've identified that given our landlocked situation, there's only 4 or 5 real feasible development properties left. The other thing we wanted you at least to be aware of is a time frame. Again, I'll stipulate with Mr. Hebert in the short run, very little interest in this property. What we wanted to do with this list was take you back, if you look at the past 30 years of history in the Santa Fe corridor, and people like Jose and Mr. Taylor have been here many, many, many years, realize how much this corridor has transformed. From, say, 1980, when it was still primarily an industrial, rural corridor, and Chris can tell you that when we talk with major brokers, to over the last 30 years, we estimate probably maybe $500 million of investment in the corridor, if you add both public and private. And we just pointed out some examples of that. The Centennial Racetrack, which was opened in 1955, was purchased in 1979, is now the site of probably, we estimated 1,000 dwelling units, a Home Depot, those kinds of things. So we kind of marched you down the corridor and said, yes, if you were to look at this kind of little orphan property today, it looks kind of sad and lonely, and well, it's pretty though because the trees out there, Jim. I think it's real pretty. But we wanted you to at least in a time frame. Is it likely to be a development project? No. But because of this critical location of it's one of the few, I think we have 2 remaining signalized locations along the corridor that the Colorado Department of Highways will allow, and one of them happens to be right here. Property is difficult, but again, looking at the influence area, will the Meadowwood Mobile Home Park be a mobile home park forever? I don't know. I know there's several other mobile home parks, like where the Riverfront Center is now, that are not there. I know that the Centennial Racetrack is not there. I know that further down here, what used to be the Quig Newton wheat farm and the Silver Crown fertilizer dispenser, which every spring, when I was community development director, I would have to get calls about the smell, actually coming from Debbie's neighborhood now, about as the fertilizer was ripening in the spring. But it's not there. Did anybody imagine in 1980 that Silver Crown fertilizer would be a 280,000 square foot shopping center? Probably not. So, is it gloomy and difficult now? Yes. But what we wanted to at least say, the notion that it would never, ever be developed into commercial property, we would say is perhaps premature. Notwithstanding that, given the fact that there seems to be very keen interest in having this property develop into some, which appears to us to be somewhat undefined, recreation, open space, solar garden. We're not sure exactly what that is, and maybe some of the people who are scoping this can help the council. But it's to go look at it. It's going to, DRC, we kind of played our wet blanket role. Be careful. We've got these properties. You need to be careful. All right. We're surrendering. We're surrendering. We're not going to play. I'm retiring my wet blanket. We surrender. So what we're going to suggest to you then is, if this is a interesting concept to you, go do the homework. Put together a task force, which I think certainly Mr. Lorenz and a lot of the skilled staff over at South Suburban, perhaps Mr. Spring from TPL, a couple of council members, to go kick the tires. Go do the homework. He suggested, and we'll open this up for discussion, but to move this forward and to have at least a majority of you say, we want to move forward, we want to get it under contract, we want to make a purchase from Mr. Hebert, is to have some better, more specified idea of what you would do with the property and what some of the constraints might be. So we've pointed out that irrespective of, Mr. Hebert seems to think that storm drainage because of the detention pond with CDOT is not a big issue. We're a little bit uncertain about that, but there's certainly some very experienced engineers out there who could tell you that. We don't know what ideas Mr. Lorenz and his board have in here, whether they're play fields, whether they're, I don't know if there's stands, I don't know if there's parking lots. Whatever they're going to be, they're certainly going to have some sort of impact on the neighbors. We recommend that they do some outreach to talk with the neighbors to see what may happen here. The mayor and I shared an experience of the Jackass Hill Park, which was purchased 20 years ago, and not really much of a real consensus came about from the surrounding neighborhood as to what that property should be. So I don't know what that dialogue would be with the surrounding neighborhood. And quite frankly, I don't know much about the solar garden. And I think Phil had done, Mr. Stallman, as I understand it, was interested and could perhaps, and I believe about a 5-acre threshold is what you had suggested, Mr. Stallman. I don't know if that's based on some other prototypes of 5 acres. So I don't know quite what's all in a solar garden. I'm assuming there's solar panels. I'm assuming there's some sort of electrical generation equipment. So if this is in the floodplain, then I would assume that would be an important aspect if we were going to plant a solar. Maybe it doesn't matter if solar gardens are in floodplains. I don't know. But I don't know quite how they work. I don't know how this power gets distributed. I don't know a lot of those technical things. So that's the staff and certainly This is a joint recommendation from Charlie and Chris and Dennis, so if you guys want to speak up. But that's our recommendation, is given that there's this very keen interest that you actually put together a task force, that you perhaps give the task force a budget where you can actually hire some engineering assistants, site plan assistants. I don't know if Mr. Lorenz's staff would be available to put together a preliminary site plan. There's some planning and processes to go through. And Charlie, Chris, or Dennis, help me out here. Am I missing some kind of component of our brainstorming there? If not, then, Shannon, how you doing? Shannon Carter from Arapahoe County, who's certainly, I think his wheelbarrow of money is up. Did you park the wheelbarrow in the spot that I reserved for him? Okay, I called him today and I said we'd give him a special spot to park his wheelbarrow money, because he can't carry it. It's too heavy for him.
That's an upgrade from Susan Beckman's money bag.
Yeah, I mean, Shannon was going to file, I think, a workers' comp from carrying all that money around, so we loaned him a wheelbarrow to park it out there. So, Mayor, I don't know the staff analysis, if what we sent out, we tried to get big picture, if it kind of met your expectations or other council members. It's really more suggestive in terms of if you want to move forward with this. We think the task force format seems to have been a constructive format in the past, where you can get perhaps hire some technical assistance, perhaps have some dialogue, maybe with the adjacent property owners. And Mr. Lorenz, you've been through this many, many times, so I don't know if the task force format, I know you've used it, I think, successfully, so it's really more suggestive. But if none of the other team, I'll open it up for questions, dialogue. We really just wait to have some direction from you.
Questions? Deb?
Dave, could you run through a scenario of how a task force would work, as you said, would work on this?
And Dave, can you come to the
You can
microphone so they can pick you up on,
You can sit over here if you want, Dave.
because we're televised.
There's a seat right here.
Oh.
Here, open seat.
Have a microphone, we'll travel.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure I can answer that question, because I think a task force can take on many functions depending on the goal or the direction of it. What I've heard Mr. Woods say is bring some interested parties together to sit down and evaluate the pros and cons. And we're certainly happy to participate in that process. I don't know if you have more specific question there.
Bruce?
I guess I was going to maybe make a few comments on the whole solar garden thing, if you guys will indulge me for a minute.
Please. Shine some light on the solar garden things.
Illuminate. It's an illuminating conversation. Yeah, exactly. Jim Woods did a very nice job of discussing sort of the, checkered history of this particular property. And I guess my take on it, I am sensitive to the commercial side of the whole thing, I'm sensitive to two things. On the one hand, I think you can make a fairly compelling argument that we've got an awful lot of open space in inventory, but we also have plenty of open space dollars looking for a home. So that's a bit of a conundrum. At the same point in time, for a lot of reasons, some commercial would be nice. Sales tax revenue, economic development, jobs, retail, the whole 9 yards, juxtaposed against the fact that you've got an abutment of that particular property with some residential neighborhoods that probably aren't overly excited about incremental commercial, and then certainly the impact on the park, which has been pretty well documented vis-a-vis a commercial infrastructure deployment. So just in terms of thinking through the proximity of all those issues, back in early November, I attended it's called Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, statewide roundtable down at DU. And one of the concepts that got presented was a city of Fowler down in the Arkansas Valley that has done a smaller version of what they called a solar farm, or a solar garden, I should say. And it was an interesting concept because there's for a variety of reasons, which I'll direct your attention to here in just a bit. But it piqued my interest and ultimately just started connecting the dots with this particular property, given we've got a magnitude of open space. Now, whether the solar garden is appropriate for this particular property or for some other property, I think there's a lot of opportunities for a win-win scenario that balances sort of the green, open, an open space, sustainable, less impactful deployment of a project that yet could have some economic upside for the community in a lot of different ways. And in that regard, if you take a look at the little PowerPoint presentation slide that was attached to this, which you all more or less have up for our
Yeah, that was attached to the memo.
Yeah,
So-
viewing audience. Conceptually, I sort of looked at it like this. I'm not saying this is necessarily the be-all and end-all of how the project construction would be developed. I think there's probably a lot of ways to skin the proverbial cat. Certainly there's probably grant money for a lot of this. But the key here is initially trying to figure out how to purchase the property using open space money if it was going to be deployed into something other than an overt natural state to perpetuity. And per conversations with City Attorney Suzanne, it appears that if there is an opportunity to use the open space for educational purposes, that the utilization of open space funds is not precluded. It appeared when you and I talked about it, it looked pretty straightforward that there was maybe a decent opportunity to conceptualize this as an environmentally based educational project that could potentially use some open space money. So hypothetically, if this thing were purchased with open space money and then leased to, for the sake of an argument, a holding company that is constructed legally as a master limited partnership, whereby investors, including citizens, could make an investment in the infrastructure development of this, which would then go through a construction firm and again, either uses investment money or grant money, so forth and so on. The key here is to provide sufficient capital from a variety of sources to get the thing constructed, but the more money that's provided for example, from grant, or in this case of leasing it for $1 a year, it lowers the cost of the power that's being generated from the solar. The master limited partnership structure then allows tax benefits to flow directly back to the individual shareholders, similar to a real estate investment trust or what's referred to as a REIT or a master limited partnership that gets traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So technically, citizens in and around the community could buy shares in this thing for some price and get the tax benefits, and there are a lot of tax incentives from doing solar construction, and then ultimately a return on the investment if they so chose to make an investment of that nature. I'll give you some information in a minute on at least one other firm that does this sort of stuff as their core competency. Once constructed, I'm throwing 5 megawatt solar garden array out there as something that was discussed at the sustainability roundtable. certainly other configurations, you know, smaller, potentially larger. The space constraints would be would be the key issue. Floodplain, not sure. I don't think we've got a lot of infrastructure. These things sit up on pylons, as far as I understand it. So in theory, I wouldn't
Might not be a constraint at all.
Wouldn't know. Yeah, I don't know, but I can envision that it might not be a huge concern. And then ultimately, you're generating electricity that's used under purchase power contracts from people like the city for the city center, for the sewer plant, for Aspen Grove, for the apartments behind that are going in behind Aspen Grove, for Arapahoe Community College. There's no shortage of need from a power consumption perspective. And the indications would be, without having run the numbers specifically, the indications would be that if we can make the grant contributions and utilize the open space dollars to buy the cost of the project down, that the power contract should be relatively affordable vis-a-vis an Excel alternative. Lastly, engaging Arapahoe Community College, which has a pretty robust tech studies program over there, to maintain this thing, to make sure it's operating and use it as an educational vehicle, satisfies the open space requirement for education, but clearly is advantageous as far as Arapahoe is concerned, and again positions the community forward thinking, you know, at the forefront of how to put something like this together, where you've gone complete vertical integration in terms of benefits for the citizens, both financially and from an ancillary standpoint, while having something that is a natural progression to sort of the whole park structure that's a utilization of space, but not a degradation of space from a pure commercial environment, given the location of this particular piece of property. I'm going to give you a couple of handouts. Well, yeah, there's several handouts here. Pass these around, and there's probably a couple of extras, which, you know, Charlie and Chris and anybody else who wants one. I didn't make enough for everybody, but actually give me one of them, too. I don't want to be talking blind here. Not that that would necessarily stop me from talking.
Understood.
Yeah, exactly. The first article here is just it's a recent article on a very large municipal solar project that San Francisco brought online. Again, roughly 5 megawatts of power. They indicate that it can generate power for 1,500 homes at 23.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And again, without having run the economics, this thing says the price that they're paying for this will allegedly save roughly $1 million per year in energy costs. The second couple of articles, or the second pages here, I pulled down the stuff from Fowler. They didn't get in. There's a little bit in here as far as they got a little bit in here about a solar garden and what they do from the standpoint of illuminating with their town park across the street from a school which they've renovated with solar-powered LED lights for a new sidewalk system, so forth and so on. But this gives you an idea of what this particular community has done broadly in terms of sustainable applications that I think is interesting, just getting out in the forefront of this. And again, it's a bit about brand image, and we've talked about this dating back to sort of the workshop last year, that positioning Littleton in this manner, if there's economic advantages to the community, given we're looking to cut budgets, if we can do something like this, if we've got funding available to do it, if it is low impact and sustainable, if we've got access to the open space dollars, if it does promote Littleton as well as potential citizen involvement in a direct investment in the project, and provides education and jobs, it struck me as having an awful lot of upside opportunity worthy of exploration for potentially this site, because this looked like it was a site that could benefit from something like this, or in another open space site somewhere in the city, whether it's the sewer plant site, if you will, even though that's in Englewood, or ACC grounds or some such thing. But long story short, that was sort of the concept and sort of mechanically how it might be structured in order to make it work hypothetically or conceptually in terms of getting the money and the capital into the project and the outputs to generate actual power from a solar array.
Thank you, Bruce.
I just want to make a comment on what your first article that you handed out, Bruce. This says in order to do 5 megawatts of power, it takes 12 football fields. A football field is about an acre in size. So in order to get 5 megawatts, you're going to take up that entire 14 acres practically to put in a 5 megawatt
I think
solar field.
It's a fair question. I honestly do not know the answer to it. The impression in what was presented at the sustainability roundtable was that 5 megawatts could be done in about 5 acres. I don't know if there are different, there's obviously a cost trade-off, and I assume there's different levels of collector efficiency. So perhaps with less money, you need more collectors to get the same amount of power.
Or bigger.
Or which would take more space, presumably, yeah. But hypothetically, if you've got, you maybe have more money, you can condense it into a smaller array and collect the same amount of power in a smaller area because you've got more efficient photovoltaics. Honestly, don't know. It's clearly something that needs to be addressed or looked at. Alternatively, though, I mean, we've got roughly 7 acres on the L-shaped thing there. And even if it were scaled down, hypothetically, even based on what you're saying, Jim, it might be maybe 2.5 megawatts, which I don't know what the economics are yet. I just think it's intriguing enough to warrant further study because it might make a lot of sense, and maybe it makes sense to do a smaller one to start and then see if there's opportunities to expand it.
Other questions? I'll have to say for the solar thing, I would not be comfortable using open space dollars to purchase property that we're going to turn into a solar array that produces power that's sold to something else. And it may be just my level of comfort with what I perceive the voters thinking they were passing and what the legal language allows us to do. And we went through that process with the building that's on Spotswood and Littleton Boulevard that's now under contract, where we potentially could have been legally correct in doing that, but we decided not to because we thought that that would perhaps be bending the intent of the voters too far. And that's my feeling on this. But I've got a couple questions about the property in Santa Fe. Bruce?
Can I ask you, before you go down that road?
Sure.
And I understand your comment. Would it be worth, just again, what Suzanne and I looked at didn't seem to be out of bounds, and I guess from the standpoint of if it made sense to look in that direction, would it be worth exploring it from either a legal and or sort of to take off on what Centennial was doing, some sort of a community survey as to whether whether the community or the citizens would have heartburn over it? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it strikes me, given all of the upsides to it, it's worth hypothetically looking at in more depth or exploring more before saying it's not worth doing.
Well, this is just my opinion, but I would have a difficult time standing up in front of a group of voters over there and some other group and explaining how open space money that was collected by Arapahoe County in order to purchase parks and open spaces turned into a educational project that generates power that's being purchased by commercial entities, maybe with or without a middle corporation that sells shares in the to raise capital to build the solar array. That's my level of comfort. Peggy?
You started speaking before I jumped in, because I've just been sitting here quiet, but I was going to say that same thing. If you could, I mean, you could stretch the notion of education as a purpose for something we would buy. You could put a school there. You could put all kinds of things, educational. But I don't see that putting a school there, and I certainly don't see putting a money-making facility there as meeting the needs, the spirit, and even if we have a legal view, it doesn't seem to me to be meeting the spirit of that. It would seem to me if we wanted to do something with some money that we had, or ask for grants or whatever, certainly the solar garden is nice, but I just don't see it there. I don't see it fitting in with the park.
What, you want to talk a little bit about what the use of the funds can be addressed?
I mean, I don't have the agreement in front of me, but it talks about using open space dollars for educational purposes. Just like the mayor talked about on the Sternberg building, it talked about using the open space dollars for historic preservation purposes. And so while there may be uses of the funds, I mean, it's really more of a policy decision about whether, it goes back to whether you believe that was the intent or whether you want to use the money for that purpose. So, I mean, I don't think you and I ever talked about this middle concept. We talked about a solar farm, and I'm not sure we ever got into the issue of it being a corporation and that sort of thing. And I think when we had that discussion, I told you that if we bumped up against the boundaries, it would probably be a good idea to go talk to the county.
Right.
Because it's actually the county that we have the IGA with, and the county who would be, we could get some kind of an opinion on how they, perceive that. But certainly other entities have used those monies, I'll say creatively, and I don't want to, call out certain projects, but there has been, use of that dollars that have kind of pushed that envelope a little bit, and it's really just for the council to decide. If you want to give us direction to go explore that, we can do that.
Okay.
And with all due respect to the county, my personal opinion is the county can tell us what we can't spend the money for, but the county really can't tell us what we can spend the money for. And what I mean by that is the IGA is between the county and us, but that may or may not reflect what my perception is, what the voters thought that they were voting for when they did that. And that's why even if the IGA between us and the county would allow an interpretation like this, that doesn't necessarily satisfy my personal threshold for what it is. But like I said, I'm one of 7 people, so that's just my opinion. Jose?
In our talks, I thought we were talking about the bottom side of that property and still allowing the top up near Santa Fe to remain, yeah. Leave that as open space.
This piece back here, this kind of
Right.
rectangular piece.
And that, I think, is 6 acres,
It's about 7.
6, 7 acres.
I think, Jim, it kind of splits. Is that about right? About 7? 7.5. 7.5, and then about 6.5 here, okay?
And then possibly leaving the rest of that for future commercial, if it should come along. It'll be up to the gentleman, but by doing it this way, he can, you can be land poor holding a piece of ground for years and years, and as long as you hold a gun to his head, the only thing he's going to end up doing is paying taxes. I think what we're trying to do now is to allow him to sell a portion of that we could use for open space, and I feel like Jim does. I would like to have it for open space, Doug, for open space with the way that the monies are allotted for open space from counties and everybody else. That would be my my way that I would go, and I just think I remember talking about the bottom 7 acres when we were chatting.
Deb?
I think that the solar garden is an interesting concept. This is the first time I've heard of something like that, and I think it's an interesting concept. I think that in terms of a municipality being able to, kind of be self-sufficient from Excel is always appealing, but I fall into a bit of the thinking in terms of that particular property, and with as it being open space, and I'm not convinced that the open space money that a plan like that would go through with that money. I think it would be quite a juggle, quite a push to make it happen. I'm not sure that it's practical. And I also feel in terms of open space that there's kind of this purity to open space, that word open, and an opportunity for the public, because it is the public land, to be able to visit that property. And the garden, tonight it just dawned on me that would really be off limits to the public. I think it would be because of the mechanics and the electrical and all of those things, it's probably would become more of a hazard area. And that property has some of the most beautiful vistas along that river because of the way it's located and its height. And the public wouldn't be able to enjoy it. It'd be producing energy, but in the truest sense of open space, I think we'd be bastardizing that.
On the solar gardens issue, though, I'd like to say that I think the solar garden concept is an interesting concept. It's just my objection is putting it on land purchased with open space. But last Saturday, part of the Metro Mayor's Caucus retreat, we were talking about solar power and energy-related topics, and there's a lot going on with solar. And it might be worthwhile. There was a guy at the caucus that was a consultant that has a grant related to solar power education and solar power generation. And apparently there's a lot of different constructs that are out there. It might be worthwhile getting him in here and talking about the different potential avenues that exist. And that's part of the decision that the caucus was going down, is they want to prepare some educational materials to help cities know how to implement solar power, both for themselves in their own buildings and for residents or citizens and businesses there. If you all are okay, I have a couple questions, and one is the warrants. What warrants need to be met for the traffic light? And you said the traffic light is...
Charlie, I'll have Charlie Bloston, our Director of Public Services, come to the table for the people in the audience and address the mayor's question.
Do you remember those?
There are 3 warrants in order to get a traffic signal, or 3 things. One is you need the side street traffic I'm going to give you a number that's not definitive, but it's in the vicinity of like 55 vehicles an hour for an 8-hour period. You also need to have a location that doesn't conflict with other traffic signals. And the location for this one has been defined and approved by CDOT. And then you need about $250,000.
For the warrants, are you saying that over an 8-hour period it has to average 55 vehicles an hour?
No, you have to have a minimum of 55 vehicles an hour for an 8-hour period.
Each hour for
Yes.
an 8-hour period?
Right.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be consecutive 8 hours, but you have to have 8 hours in a 24-hour period with the side street traffic turning left. I better say that right.
So it's turning left onto Santa Fe?
Right, because a right turn motorist does not need the traffic signal. And since there's not an opposing street on the east side of the intersection, all traffic leaving from this location must be turning left and have the need for a traffic signal. And that would be 8 hours with about 55 cars a day.
A day?
I mean an hour for an 8-hour period.
So give us, if you can, an equivalent of the types of businesses that we have in Littleton right now that would generate that.
Aspen Grove.
And
Hudson Gardens with ACC, but that's a...
That's a combination of both.
A common...
Where you have another one like this would be,
and actually, that's almost all ACC, isn't it?
Say what?
On the Hudson Gardens ACC intersection, I'm assuming the vast majority of that
most
traffic...
of the 8-hour period was coming from ACC. Another location might be the Safeway King Supers traffic signal on Mineral Avenue. The Home Depot, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken bank facility on Bellevue. I would bet all those together might generate the need for a signal.
How hard would it be for you to count that?
To count what?
A couple of those intersections?
Can't
you just throw down
At this time of the year, it would take, I couldn't do it now until weather permits. We
Okay.
can't do it in the winter.
Because the plows would scrape up your blobs?
You also get a different traffic pattern in the winter than you do in the summer or the spring, and it's much less.
Okay.
But no, I can't do traffic counts at this time of the year.
All right, next question is, are there floodplains on a portion of this property? 100-year floodplains?
Got to put on my other hat. There is a floodplain. Jim, if you could point out the little pond on the east side of Santa Fe, right, east side.
Oh,
that one.
Right here.
Yeah, there is a floodplain that goes from southeast to northwest underneath the railroad tracks in Santa Fe. Right now, the flood waters would come along the east side of the railroad tracks and flood across the tracks in Santa Fe. But there is a pipe underneath the railroad and Santa Fe to accommodate not the 100-year, but a good portion of the storm. But the pipe is plugged intentionally, because if we release that plug, it's going to flood all over the mobile home park. But part of the Abear property is within what is known as the Rangeview Gulch floodplain, and it is defined floodplain 100-year as mapped by the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. And it goes in the northwest direction of where Jim was pointing on the map, right? Yeah, and generally in that area, maybe a little bit more to the right. And with a previous development, they were going...
I haven't looked at that floodplain delineation, but I think it actually covers several mobile homes.
Yes, it does, right.
So it probably kind of comes with it.
And you need to accommodate that, and we can, according to the criteria, we do not allow structures within the floodplain. Can be some grading done, and it requires a process through the Planning Commission for a special exception permit to allow grading or some minor things done in a floodplain. Parking lots can be built in floodplains as long as you don't flood the parking lot by more than 12 inches. Landscaping obviously can be done in a floodplain. Parks have been done in floodplains. Open space, of course.
Did I hear you correctly that the 100-year flood would go over the top of the railroad tracks on the east side of Santa Fe?
If we had one today, it would go over the railroad tracks and Santa Fe Drive and flood to the northwest, and generally the area that city manager was pointing, yes.
Okay. Peggy?
Yeah, so a little different question. Potentially, that the L-shaped property could be subdivided and different funds used to purchase different portions and used for different reasons.
I assume, I guess,
I mean,
given what
is
your
it-
potential funds are and your potential reasons.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure of the potential funds either, but
Sure.
the price.
Well,
the-
I'm speaking, I'm sort of blithely handling Mr. Abear's property here, so, whether he would want to chop it up that way or not, but just, physically or
Yeah,
property-wise, I assume you could chop it up some way as long as
but
you were able to reach an amenable agreement with Mr. Abear.
the ballpark is 2.1 for the whole L shape.
I had written down I think Jim, your appraisal?
The appraisal, 2.9.
9, that's
Oh,
the number I had
2.9.
written down, yeah.
That
That was an appraisal you got just a few months ago.
whole thing.
No, actually, I looked that up after I was here, and 2 years ago in February.
Oh, 2 years, so it's a 2-year-old appraisal. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, that's.
Yeah, well, in emails,
the
you
number
and I.
he had mentioned,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
ma'am.
So, I don't know, how doable all that is, but I'm just thinking of multiple possibilities, particularly given that what we just said about a flood and that you could at least have, trees or other stuff on that part where the flood would potentially cut across. I actually have mixed feelings on some of what we're talking about. I've already said I'm not comfortable with putting the solar garden there, although I like the idea of one somewhere. I like buffering the park more, having more open space. But I don't want to, I also really would like in some way to preserve something for possible future retail development and/or a combination of something, retail and upscale apartments, because I think there's going to be more and more demand for some upscale stuff along the corridor there, given the incredible views. So, not sure what to say.
Are there any other questions? Jim?
Well, I'll inherit Jim Wood's wet blanket, because we went through a very painful budget session this year, ladies and gentlemen, because we didn't have the revenue to do the programs that we wanted to do, and to put freezes on salaries to all the staff, and eliminated 20 positions when you count the ones that we had not been filling for a couple of years. We need to try to preserve as much space as we can for retail development. And this is a prime site that's been identified as a site for retail development. The problem when you start splitting it off is that you begin to limit how much retail development you can put in there that's going to generate the kind of money that you're going to need to help us with our budget problems, and that will help meet the warrants that Charlie identified to get a traffic light. And CDOT is very, very specific about where their traffic lights are going to go. That's been announced years ago, that they will allow these lights to go only in very specific places, spaced so far apart, and they are not going to change that policy. And if we don't get a traffic light there, we will eventually have somebody killed coming out of the mobile home park trying to make a left turn onto Santa Fe. That those people, as long as that mobile home park is there, is going to need some access to get out of there. So I'm going to inherit his wet blanket in saying we need to keep this as property that we can develop for retail.
Council, I'm going to suggest that perhaps the proper course of action is to decide in an executive session if we want to pursue the property or any portion of the property, because we would then need to give instructions to our negotiators, and I think that we would want to not be publicly divulging whatever position we're going to take if we decide to take a position for negotiations. On a somewhat related vein, I'm going to suggest next week when we talk about, and I think it's on next week's agenda, the workshop topics.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to suggest that we address potential open space acquisitions across the city, and perhaps maybe structuring that as a task force or doing that as a workshop topic or something related to that, because we do have a chunk of money in the open space fund. That tax expires in 2013. I believe, in my personal opinion, is we have an obligation to spend the money that the taxpayers chose to tax themselves for the purpose that they voted for. So, and there are potentially other sites in addition to this site that might be desirable that we'd want to look at. So, and I think just to add one more item of complexity to this did go through a rezone. It also went through a referendum. There are certain limitations on after the referendum passes, what can be rezoned back onto the property. Suzanne and I disagree on what the limits are of what the charter states as what happens on when a referendum loses. But the basic parameters are, the charter says that once an ordinance that's been referred to the people has been voted down, it cannot be reenacted without a vote of the people. And so the question is, since zoning is done by an ordinance, what does that really mean on zoning? And you can go all the way from the position that I'm inclined towards, and that is that any rezone is the same ordinance, to the position that Suzanne is inclined towards, and that's any change in the zoning other than the PD plan that was submitted would be an acceptable do-over without a vote, because that would be a different ordinance. So once again, this becomes a question of what does each council person think the intent of the charter is, and how would that affect future potential development on this site? Because anything that goes in here is going to have to be zoned unless it's 5-acre lots, because that's what it's currently zoned for. So if there's no more discussion on this topic, our next item is sewer bills.
Doug Farman, our finance director, will present this item to council.
Good evening, council. This topic of utility billing frequency was discussed broadly last January.
Hang on a second. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Shannon and Dave.
Justin?
Thank you.
Justin. Appreciate it. Sorry, Doug.
Oh, no, that's okay. Councilmember Stallman asked us to follow up on that information in more detail, which was outlined in a staff memorandum just this last November. And just to set the framework on the utility billing, we do bill for sewer and storm drainage or storm services, and it's done right now in an annual billing. That billing to approximately 52,000 customers is done in June. We also send out a follow-up bill in July for any outstanding balances. The due date, which is set by city code, is August 15th. And then after that, we will send out a late notice in September. And all of this is predicated on the county's certification date, which is November 1st. So anything that's outstanding as of that date will get certified with the county, and those outstanding charges go to the county and will be billed on the citizens or the customer's property tax notice. So right now we do send out the 2 billings prior to the due date, and I think council wanted to talk a little bit about flexibility in that schedule.
Yes, sir. Bruce first and then Deb.
Well, as Doug indicated, this is come around again, so I was going to try to, I don't know that there's not a clear-cut solution to this problem. I think we've seen sewer bills and storm drainage invoices go up over time, they're likely to continue at that level. I think, as we've seen with the sewer plant cost structure and capacity issues and so forth and so on, and incremental costs that may at some point be incurred. It seems, and you get a fair amount of citizen feedback, that given the magnitude of these bills, it's becoming a bit more challenging for people to make a single payment. I guess my ultimate suggestion here was going to be something along the lines of it, just using the number that was in the back of the memo that Mr. Woods provided from Mr. Farman's memo. If you take $140,000 and you divide it by 52, which is the cost of multiple billing, two additional full billings, plus the software conversion, and you divide that by 52,000 roughly accounts, you're looking at $2.67 service charge to do a multiple bill. I guess what I'd sort of propose is, again, taking a cue from what Centennial does, maybe throw a survey on the website, publicize it in the Littleton Report, and try to get feedback from people as to whether they think multiple billings would be good, because I think we can see why they would be advantageous to some people, but I don't know that we have a definitive view of whether it's worth incurring the cost to do that, or more to the point, if some majority of people who were to complete a survey might say, yeah, I'm willing to pay a service fee of $2.67 to be able to pay a $300 bill in 2 installments. Now, maybe they can do that anyway, but it doesn't generally seem to be well understood in the community that you can budget bill and you can pay in, quarterly installments or whatever you want to do. So I'm coming at it from the standpoint of, if it would make people's lives easier from a financial management and personal financial budgeting perspective, and if there's feedback, if we get some citizen feedback, as opposed to just saying, hey, we're going to do this and stick you another $2.67 per bill, if it looks like it's something people want and they're not significantly opposed to paying a service fee to get it, it seems to me like, again, a reasonable win-win for everybody involved. That's where I was coming from.
Deb?
Well, I'm not sure if all council saw the emails today. I had sent an email to Doug Farman earlier to get an idea of exactly what does it cost us in terms of soft cost for salaries and all of that to run the sewer bills through. And is this the?
That is the number for the staff plus postage plus bank fees.
Okay, so annual expenditure, staff cost, which includes the full cost of staff, benefits, et cetera. Postage and mailing and bank fees is $232,940. And then I look at the cost to have Denver Water do the billing monthly, and it's $165,500. That's a substantial savings right there. We don't know, and Doug, based on what you've said here, we don't know what Denver Water would charge us to do it, if there's a fee, if there's some sort of bank fees. We don't know any of that, but the difference between those two, oh geez, somebody has to do some fast math. $50,000-ish?
Close to $50,000, and at the time
in savings.
At the time we talked to Denver Water, they were talking to other districts about doing some services like that. So this has, to my knowledge, they don't have anything quite in place yet, but they may have some contracts that they are going to be finalizing soon that we could take a look at, because I don't know the specifics, what that would involve, what the scope of work would be from Denver Water's standpoint. I don't know still how much staff time would be involved from our standpoint to answer questions from customers or deal with Denver Water issues, those type of things. So,
well, I know when I lived in Denver, we'd get they were always combined, and Denver's sewer bill is substantially lower. I think my sewer fee was like $13 every 2 months, which would translate now to about $650 a month. But we're up to 200 plus on some of our sewer bills, and to spread that out on over a monthly basis would be a lot less impactful than the once-a-year punch we do, even though we allow them to split that payment. And then, Bruce, I'm not sure if you're talking quarterly or twice a year, because I'm hearing things from citizens, not only on the fact that they don't like having to pay it that one time and then be late one day and those types of things, but also that's a huge amount of money once a year to come up with, and it is a big amount, and it's getting bigger. And as much as you do try to put those things in your budget, it does, it does stretch the old dollars over a few months there. So I think trying to hit it from a couple of fronts, and I don't know, I mean, how much complaining there would be. I mean, it is, if it comes in the water bill, there's water and sewer. I suppose people would, I don't know how you would figure that out. If they're going to complain about their water bill, do they complain to Denver Water? If they're going to complain, is that what you're thinking in terms of that?
We'd have to deal with some questions and issues and things like that.
Which we do now, and we do now probably on a much higher level than we would if it was broken down to that. Because around sewer billing time, you guys get deluged, particularly after the deadlines have passed.
No pun intended.
So I guess part of me feels like I'd like to flush out the Denver Water option even more so than we have here, and get them off the dime a little bit. I mean, are they, another pun. Are they, how long have they been messing around with this with other cities? And we've been talking to them. I know we've talked about this for 2 years.
Right, and they were in transition because they just installed a new billing system not too long ago. So now that they kind of have that up and running is when they have decided they do have capacity and the ability to maybe consider these other arrangements. And it might make sense for a lot of entities to do it that way. So there would be some things we'd have to talk to them about, but now would be the time to pursue it. The other thing is if we do, kind of outsource that, we'd be losing some of the control, and the more arrangements they make with other entities, you're going to have less control because they're going to have constraints and arrangements with those entities.
What kind of control?
Like maybe the ability to send out billings on a certain date because their billing system's being inundated by another entity or something like that, or maybe their staff is working on another project or dealing with other phone calls from...
But wouldn't they bill it with the water bill? So isn't that the efficiency here, is that your water bill comes and it's with your water bill?
You would think, yes, that would be what you would work toward.
So they would do it separately initially?
No, I think they would do it all in one bill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's the concept.
So you get your water bill and you've got your water fee and your sewer fee.
Right, right. Peggy?
Don't we have some people that don't get Denver water? Maybe
Yes.
they have wells, or didn't you say your house up the hill?
It was served by Englewood.
Yeah.
Sewer.
Charlie, you want to comment on what
Sewer.
population?
Oh, sewer?
There are. Inglewood sewer is our sewer.
Okay.
There are a number of properties in the city that are not served by Littleton Sewer, primarily in the northeast neighborhood and northwest. They don't get our sewer at all. They all go to Englewood. There is a small part of Littleton in the far northwest area that is served by Englewood Water.
Charlie, the Inglewood people would be billed by Inglewood.
Yes.
Right? So I think Dr. Cole's question, it sounds like it'd be a very small number.
It's a small number, but it is some. And then there are some people who would get a storm drainage bill without a sanitary sewer bill. An example is the people that live in the Shady Croft Rangeview area that are not on the city sewer, they have septic, they would get a water bill from Denver Water, no sanitary bill, but they would get a storm drainage bill, because every property in Littleton gets a storm drainage bill.
How much is that?
$24 a year per residence, which has not changed one dime since 1986. Just had to throw that in, okay?
So who sends those out?
We do.
Doug does.
We do.
It's part of the, but I think Peggy's question, though, was for more than just the city limits, because the question would be valid for the entire, all the connector districts also.
Yes.
And Roxborough isn't, but we bill them as a mass.
Yeah, that's a master meter.
Roxborough and Kincaro are the two districts that get a master bill. Roxborough's not on Denver Water.
But I mean, to give it some perspective, Charlie, all the districts to the west, Southwest Metro, I mean, the overwhelming majority of those people get Denver Water.
Yes.
I'd have to think out of 52,000, I mean, I'm just making up a number, but I'd have to think it'd be like 95, 96.
Well, we know that all of Roxborough does not, but that's the only district that is 100% out of Denver Water.
And that's a mass bill anyway, so.
Yes, that's one
So see, they're
invoice.
not affected. I understand your point, but I think, my sense, Dr. Cole, is it would be a very small number that could not be, if following Debbie's thinking, if we could work out a satisfactory arrangement with Denver, I think it'd be a very small number that could not be served that way, but I understand your question.
Have we approached the districts on their preference one way or the other?
No. I haven't.
Okay. No. Peggy?
I guess part of, and I think it's good to flesh this out. But part of my concern is, once you've turned this, of course, we could always take it back, I guess. Once you've turned it over, you know, kind of gotten rid of that as a regular activity, would the rates go way up, the way some other things seem to keep going way up?
You mean just because of the service fees they would
Yeah,
charge us?
you know, or,
I mean, with Denver Water's rates for
yeah, yeah. And, I mean, I know if we could then decide to take it back and so forth, but.
Yeah, I think Doug, Mr. Farmer's just trying to give you, there's just some trade-offs here, I think.
Yeah.
Where Debbie's coming from is the convenience of the monthly billing, you know, and you'll just have to kind of weigh.
And the cost savings.
Yeah, the way the plus side of that with some possible loss of control. I think Phil mentioned the design of the bill. You know, there may be other things where we won't quite have as much of a custom hands-on. So I think you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. The attractive part of having those monthly billings, make it more financially easier on people versus maybe some other things. It's not going to be a pure play.
Couple questions, Doug.
Sure.
With the remittance that we receive now, do those come in hard copy checks?
About 90% do.
What's with the rest?
We accept credit card payments, and then online billing through their banking services. Those come in through electronic payments.
I'm going to ask a question. With those folks that come in by check, how many come through banking organizations that could handle online bill pay?
Well, we've been working more toward working with those, so they go through their online bill pay. And then a lot of the big ones now, we do have electronic payments that come through. The problem with, if you do it through your online banking, you don't have the remittance stub. And so those, right now, if you send in your remittance stub with your check, it'll go to our lockbox. But if it goes to lockbox without a stub, then it's an exception, and we can't process it quite as quickly as we can when we do have the account stub with it.
Side question, and then I'll come back to the other one, which is, as Deb has pointed out, there might be cost savings. how would those cost savings be recognized? Would that be a decrease in personnel?
We haven't considered that yet.
Just one thing to be thinking about. One of the things that, and in my household, I will admit that my better half handles most of the bill pay, but she does it through setting it up through the checking account, is if, there would be ways that folks could set up installment payment programs with either the first bill or something of that nature that would allow for those installments. We would be more than willing to take the installment pays and total them up to hit the account balance by the end due date.
Which we can do that now. You're absolutely right, and the banks can do that.
So, I mean, one of the things to be thinking about, too, would be how difficult or, education-wise can we set it up for folks that they can actually set up their own installment pays if that can work well. And I'm absolutely sympathetic. I don't like big bills. I'd rather have smaller bills and a frequency because it ends up being easier to budget around. But if folks, if we could find a way to make it easier and education-wise for them conceivably to set their own installment pay, if possibly on the bills we put a calculation there, this is 4 payments of or 6 payments of, whatever it may be. And if you wanted to match your income, if you're paid twice a month, you set it up that way and it comes out that way. Folks have a lot of, at least the information I get from my better half is that she can do it just about any way she wants.
Yeah, it is pretty flexible now, and I think we do need to publicize it more because I think a lot of people just aren't aware that we will accept payments throughout the year if that's how somebody needs to budget their money. And I mentioned in the memo that we could send out an additional postcard that would reach every customer too for $9,200. That would ensure that at least they're getting that message. Now, whether they choose to read it or don't need that service, that's another thing. Or we could put some more notices in the newspaper or on our website.
Thank you.
I agree with Bruce and Debbie that I think we're at a high enough amount that it needs to be billed more often than once a year. However, I also think that August 15th is probably a pretty firm last billing date for getting delinquency certified to the county. And because of that, I don't think it's very realistic to implement any multiple billing this year. But what I would suggest, if council is agreeable, is that we expend some energy seeing if Denver Water is really going to offer this and do a little more analysis on what the actual cost is. My experience is there's no such thing as an automated interface that doesn't require supervision and feeding and care. So, but you're not going to know that until you get some particulars on Denver Water. So once they decide they want to play, if they decide they want to play, then I think the finance department and perhaps maybe Ken Price or whoever.
Actually do a reality check on what,
Yeah.
once we have something concrete.
Yeah. Sit down and look at what
See
the
what that
process
interface
is
would actually look like.
and then what the actual cost and the staff time is going to be, and then we can compare that. Once we get that information, we can come back and compare that with whether we want to do that ourselves or not. And I think in the interim, we need to contact the districts, the connector
Get some
districts.
feedback from them.
Get some feedback from them, at least, find out what their preference is and
I think that's a good point, Doug, as a
know what
courtesy.
we're thinking of going down. Peggy?
I think a motion would be appropriate, so we have record of what we're requesting.
Okay. Bruce?
I was just going to ask that, so then you're more or less targeting to implement multiple billing
Next year?
in 12?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the only realistic thing that we can do.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. Jim?
That being said, though, if you have this deadline of August 15th, then you've got to start the billing as of a September date in order to get a year's money in to pay for the, make sure it's all paid by the August 15th deadline.
Well, I mean, there's a number of alternatives. If Denver Water does it, then one of the questions is, when do you do a cutover? Right. If we do it, and we do it twice a year, then I guess the first billing cycle would be, what, February or March, and the second one would be August. But you bring up a good point of that's one of the considerations that needs to be done, is if we're going to do this for 2012 sewer bill monies, we need to figure out when to implement that. So I will try this as a motion, and that is that we direct staff to study multiple billing, including doing it ourselves and/or with Denver Water, and to contact the sewer districts.
Second.
Hang on a second, let me write it down. I know I'll get asked.
Do we have a time frame for reporting back? Study?
I think part of that will be data that they get when they explore what the different alternatives are. For instance, if they're going to Denver Water, it'll be a cutover time. If we're going to do it ourselves, then it'll be whatever month we need to start doing that, and then the back off to get the bills processed and mailed out and stuff.
I was just thinking that if we're going to do it for 2012, recognizing Jim's comment, if we're going to include multiple billing with that, we would need something to be decided so that it could be initiated in September of this year.
Yeah, I don't know that September is realistic. I think that's too fast. I think you'd have to do a cutover and maybe start it right after the first of the year, right at the first of the year, at least for the initial year.
And in theory, we'd be billing them. In theory, we're billing them for charges that are actually incurred for service that takes place in January. So I don't know that you could actually start billing in September, because when they pay their bill in August, that will be for 2010 sewer service. Sorry, 2011 sewer service.
And we would run up against that every year.
Yeah. So we'll have to, that'll be part of the calculus that you do.
We're essentially looking at 7 installments for the most part.
Or 2 installments, something.
Or 12.
Or 12. All right, the motion is to go to multiple billing, to have the staff study Denver Water or doing it in-house, and contact the districts. Any other discussion?
Well, I think I would, let's see, what am I doing?
For 2012.
Right, that's the part I wanted to add, thank you.
For 2012. Council ready to vote? All in favor, raise your hands. Oh, good, it's unanimous. All right, any other business? Bruce?
Let me ask, just because it's fresh and we're doing it now, the ABER issue notwithstanding, I was hearing enough general positive commentary about the solar concept to ask, is it worth getting it on staff's agenda, or getting 4 votes to get it on staff agenda to investigate an application of solar or solar garden that we might consider further?
That would be a study session topic, I think. And there's like I said, there was a consultant at Metro Mayors, and I don't remember his name, so it would probably be, the caucus meets again in February, and maybe in February I could give you some more information, and we could figure out how to to go from there, if that's okay?
That's fine. There's also a governor's energy office.
Yes.
As well.
And actually, that was part of the whole discussion at the caucus.
Phil might want to just make a couple of comments, because he's
I-
actually corresponded with a couple of other cities. So we might be able to pull together a couple of projects that are already up and running, similar to the Fowler thing, and maybe at least get you further up your learning curve about what they cost, how they're set up, how they put together their financing. I mean, just sort of a general background, but I'll let Phil, because Phil had a direct conversation with, I think, a couple of people.
Sent out an email to the governor's office, Excel, a consultant that had worked with the governor's office that seemed to know a lot about what was going on. And basically what I got was the cities of Boulder, Pueblo, Arvada, Lafayette, and Aurora have done some sort of, there is a difference between solar farm and solar gardening, and I think you were trying to touch on that. And so I've gotten some information. Arvada was the one I could reach today, and I got the name of a Paul Glesko, I think his name is, with the Green Power Company, that I talked to him today, and he said he'd be open to just coming and explain to us what it's about, but I'm open to anybody else that you have. And I don't want to get into too much detail. I think you're right on target, Bruce. There is some fine nuances, like with Arvada. They have a water treatment plant over on Highway 93, and you can see the solar farm from there. That is a farm because it directly ties into the water treatment plant. And then basically it's a third party that goes in. This goes back to kind of a lease purchase thing. They provide the land, third party comes in, puts in the solar power, then the city of Arvada buys back that power for less per kilowatt hour. And the grants that are out there are really mostly either a Fed grant, not necessarily through the governor's office or the grants that I'm working with, but there is some other monies out there. And the rebates that they get back from Excel are the two major ones. But I certainly, and the thing that I was just running in my head is, the cities on the farms, they get involved because they have a third party, it's on their property, it's all neat and clean, and they call it a performance, you called it performance power purchase agreement, or power purchase agreement. And that's one. The gardening is a little bit different. It's where you can take a number of, like, homeowners associations, businesses, residential areas. They will, the gardening, the solar gardening won't be on their property. It'll be somewhere else, but they purchase from that power. The city doesn't get involved in that, and there's no money to be made from the city doing that.
It's all privately initiated?
Most of this is.
Because of the tax benefits.
Yeah, the companies, they want the tax, and also they want it in their portfolio. They want to, on two sides. One, it's to show that they can do this, and it's a lease-back sort of agreement, like with Arvada. After 20 years, the city takes over the
There's
farm.
financing issues and VC money and this kind of stuff.
I'm not saying it's the same, but it's going towards the same thing that we do with performance contracting. If you're going to, whether it be land that you're giving or whatever, you're going to want some kind of return on whatever you're doing. So the gardening part is, I was thinking more of like Hudson Garden. We wouldn't benefit from this, but you might want to think about places like Hudson Gardens, even Aspen Grove, if there was space, where they could put in, something to reduce their electric bills. But
So is council, Bruce is suggesting that he heard enough, he thinks there's enough interest that council would like for us to pursue some research and maybe schedule it for a future study session?
yeah, happy with fine with that.
Okay?
I'm fine with it, too. I just don't want it to be a priority of staff to have to do.
Thank you.
All right.
Staff's got things to do, and this is something that we could deal with in the fall, is not having to.
I agree, and that's part of the reason I was going back to the caucus, is because there's at least one entity that already has a grant, and part of that purpose of the grant is to get involved in things like this.
So we might be able to plug in.
You might be able to plug in where you guys don't have to spend much energy, but
Pun intended.
right before we break, I'd like to suggest one other thing, if the council is amenable, and that is, part of the conflict that we've had with the sewer districts in the past is that our collection costs appear in the same fund as the sewer plant operation costs. And maybe it's time to try and split that out. And is there interest? I'll just speed this up. I make a motion that we direct staff to propose a change to the sewer budget to break out collection costs and the plant costs.
Second.
You're going to leave them in the same fund, you're just going to line item differently.
I'm going to leave it to Doug Furman to explore whatever way he thinks is appropriate. And, I mean, there's a number of different ways that you can do it, and right now, some of the individual line items that we have, a percentage of that expense goes to collections, and a percentage of that expense goes to the plant. So, at a minimum, you're probably talking about two different line items. I don't know if it's two different funds or...
Doug, you have an immediate response to that? You want to come up to the table so they pick you up on the mic?
I think we've contemplated this in the past, and I think we have a basis to go by, but offhand, I think we would stick with one fund. We could definitely make two different divisions there between collections and treatment. I think that makes sense to me, and
yes,
we can talk about it with Charlie, but...
I have a question, though. When it gets split out, Doug, what does that do for us? I mean, if we're moving it from...
It really does nothing for us. I view it as a way of easing potential conflict with the sewer districts. We've got a census that's coming out in next year, in whatever year we're in.
This year.
2011, okay.
Yeah.
Coming out in July 2011. Our rates are set partly, we have a differential in rates between inside city and outside city that's set partly based on the census information. It's differentiating the costs between collections and the operations of the plant, I think makes it easier for them to understand what's happening, and frankly, it gets to be complex enough for us that it's pretty hard for me to go through and recalculate it. So I view it basically as a way of clarifying.
From an enterprise perspective, covering all the costs is what would still be the objective.
Yes. Yeah, it's not going to change the dollar amount, but what it's going to do is make it easier for everybody to track.
It's actually fairly easy to calculate. It's not a difficult accounting process.
And we had a consultant come in, and Charlie and the consultant sat down, and they came up with this percentage. So I don't think it's going to be real controversial to split it up. How the format comes out is
No, it can be done.
another story.
It's pretty easy, actually.
So it's more a matter of allowing for transparency rather than...
The presentation, sir,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's not going to change the dollar amount. It shouldn't. And this would be for the 2012 budget, obviously, because we've already published the 2011.
Would you want the revenues separated out in some fashion along the same manner?
Well, ideally, it would be nice to on the bill, have a collection amount and a sewer amount.
Treatment.
Because that might be a
Treatment cost.
larger work product than the expenditures, believe it or not.
No, I can believe anything at this point. So, I mean, if you can explore that, because it's,
Okay.
I mean, part of the difficulty becomes is when you have a different amount that you're charging, outside and inside, when you start increasing by percentages, people get confused about how much of that is collection related and how much of that percentage increase is treatment related. And even if the math comes out correctly, it's easy for people to mistake what's actually happening. So ideally, having separate line items on the bill would be great. But the motion is for you to propose a split in the budget, so.
Okay.
All right, motion is to propose, have Doug Furman propose a split of the budget to separate the collections and treatment costs. Any more discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. Unanimous. Debbie raised her hand. Unanimous again. Thank you, Deb. Any other business?
Quit talking to me.
Then we're adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry, Jose?
I have a question, and I'd like to use a map up there, if I could.
We're done with our meeting.
Don't we control this segment of Santa Fe now?
No, sir, CDOT does.
CDOT.
Yes, sir.
Jose, can you hold a mic?
I think this is his place back here. But.
Yeah, I think that this is his.
And they were supposed to, as far as I knew, leave a opening there for his semi-trucks to get in.
I think Charlie's had a conversation with CDOT. Charlie, want to respond?
Mr. Sutton and I have become quite good friends. I have dealt with him for several weeks now on this problem. To inform the council what this is about, CDOT has constructed what I refer to as the Great Wall of Littleton down the middle of Santa Fe Drive from Aspen Grove to Vinewood Avenue at where the traffic signal is for Hudson Gardens. They cut off left-turning access into Mr. Sutton's property. He has a large barn down by the river west of Santa Fe Drive on a private lane. It is north of the Arapahoe Douglas Mental Health Facility and south of Yes.
Right there.
Yeah, it's south of Denver Seminary.
Here's the seminary
And
parking lot, and here's Mr. Sutton's barn, and here's his
that's his,
access to get into his barn.
right. In the past, Mr. Sutton has had a number of trucks, large tractor-trailer trucks, come to this location and turn in there to unload hay, alfalfa, and other supplies. He stores it there, and then he moves it in smaller amounts to the store on Main Street. Mr. Sutton has operated Valley Feed on Main Street, I believe he told me, for like 70 years. It's been there longer than anybody.
He inherited it from his dad.
Yeah, incredible operation. Until the wall was constructed, his tractor trailers would stop right in the middle of Santa Fe Drive, in between the north and southbound lanes, wait for an opening in traffic, and then make a wide sweeping turn into that lane. With the wall there, they can't do that. And I have been working with CDOT and Mr. Sutton to try and come up with a solution for this, because right now, he doesn't have access for his trucks. They cannot turn down that lane, and it's hurting his business. At one point, CDOT said they would remove a section of that wall so the trucks could do what they have done in the past, wait in the center of the road for an opening in the southbound traffic, and then make a wide sweeping turn to get into his lane. Trucks exiting from that location don't have a problem. CDOT was going to take out that wall on the condition that when Mr. Sutton sold the property at any time, the wall would be put back immediately. He agreed to that, not a problem at all. They came back later and said that was too expensive of a change. It was $100,000. They have proposed to him, as of earlier this week, widening his driveway approach at Santa Fe Drive on the north side of it to allow for trucks to get in there. He doesn't like that solution at all. I'm not sure it's a great idea. From a technical standpoint, it does work. I think they minimize the amount of asphalt they're going to have to build, and they're going to have to move his mailbox and some other fence that's out there and cross a ditch. And so I'm in discussions with CDOT staff and as well as Gary to try and figure out another solution. He really is insisting that a portion of that wall, 75 feet of it, be removed so the trucks can come off of 470 and sit in the middle of the road northbound to make the left turn. Right now, they're coming from the north and turning southbound into the driveway.
But what Charlie said, we're trying to advocate for Mr. Sutton. We cannot dictate to the CDOT, but Charlie's trying to make the best case we can for them to try to accommodate.
I actually support Gary in his request to remove part of that wall. I think he's asking for the right solution. CDOT is objecting quite vigorously to doing that, but he had a commitment.
When would it have been, a public hearing or, an opportunity for input or notification to the property owners that this was going on? That
when CDOT proposed the project, which was about a year ago, maybe longer, we told them they had to contact every property owner that would be affected on Santa Fe from Aspen Grove to Hudson Gardens. I said also, the only other change I want to make once you get contact with the property owners is I want colored concrete. I want the wall to be tan and not typical concrete gray. They agreed to that. I must admit, I did not follow up with every property owner to say, were you contacted? So far, this is the only property owner that has come back to us saying there's a problem.
there's some precedent for taking down walls.
Right, and they also, Santa Fe Sand, yes. Now I get it. Santa Fe Sand and Gravel, they left an opening for trucks to turn in and out of there. And I made the argument to CDOT, if you do it for Santa Fe Sand and Gravel, why don't you do it for Mr. Sutton? He may not have quite the number of trucks, but its business can't exist without those trucks turning into his lane. And I started to work my way up in CDOT's organization, and I plan to go to the people that I know there and say, you got to do this. It's just pure common sense.
One of the problems that I see that he has is now that he has a right turn only, he has to go to Mineral, then he turns Mineral to Platte Canyon to Bowles, and then the last leg over to Littleton, which is about 7 miles for him to bring anything into town.
Yeah, he has to go quite a ways. I must admit, Joe, when I talked to Gary, he was okay with that. He didn't like it, but he understood it. What he really has a problem with is these tractor trailers come from a long distance. Matter of fact, yesterday I spent quite a bit of time with Gary. He's got a truck coming from Edmonton, Alberta, all the way down here to deliver a specialized load that he has available for one particular customer. And it's a good customer. And, you know, without that truck being able to turn into this property, he can't do that business. And that's his major concern. And I argued to CDOT, this project, along with the one they're doing on C470, is, I'm going to guess, between $3.5 and $5 million. For God's sake, spend $100,000 and don't put this guy out of business. That's the argument I'm making. Council, I'm doing everything I can short of taking our own crews out there and knocking down the wall.
What a good suggestion.
Oh, never mind.
Which you didn't hear us object to.
All right, anything else?
If a wandering snowplow hit a wall, wouldn't it be
Tragedy.
Jose? Oh, Council, there's these letters going around if there's no objection to signing this for RTD. It's a dogpile letter to the congressional and Senate representatives. Anyway, if there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.